Good morning and welcome to Flock Online. My name is Liam McSherry. I am the founder of Flock, online platform focusing on key sustainability matters in the tech and lifestyle sectors. Today we are focusing on mobile and sustainability. Smartphones are an integral part of our everyday life and an essential component of our present and future tech and lifestyle ecosystems. Right now, global smartphone sales are anticipated to rise, and more new brands are set to hit the market. The major brands continue to pressure consumers into upgrading to phones they don't necessarily need, to fuel a closed loop of handset rollouts with little to no innovation to speak of. However, we are, unfortunately, seeing increased media coverage about the environmental impact of creating and running a smartphone, prompting customers to switch on to their phone's carbon footprint and switching off from the next unnecessary upgrade. We have 4 speakers this morning from companies that are showing the industry that better can be done, and it can be done now. Firstly, I am joined by Luke James, Sales and Partnership Manager at Fairphone, and Lee Thompson, Senior Product Manager at Your Co-op Mobile. Morning, gentlemen. I don't know if you can unmute.
Good morning, Liam.
There we go. Excellent. How are you both?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Very well,
Good.
thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Lee, if we can start with you. Could you tell us a bit about the cooperative, their approach to the mobile markets, and what it is they're going to do that's going to change things for the better?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I think the thing that's unique about the co-op approach is the relationship between the business and its customers. So the cooperative is a democracy. We're owned by our members, who are all customers, and our board of directors is made up of elected members who approve our strategic direction and make sure we're all kept accountable. So essentially, customers are at the heart of Co-op Mobile in a way that's really, really hard to replicate outside of a cooperative. So I think this means we provide a service that serves our members' interests and reflects their ethics rather than being driven just by profit motives. So for us, that means fair tariffs, clean supply chain policies, and a commitment to climate care. And as part of we're one part of a utilities provider that also provides broadband and energy. So we're working to enable all of our members to live a socially responsible, low carbon lifestyle, while also investing our profits back into all our local communities.
Great. Okay, thank you. Luke, sustainability is important to Gen Z, but are you seeing a different age group or demographic in the UK that's taking to Fairphone?
I think if you look at Fairphone, you typically think that there would be a higher uptake of younger people. And actually, the market research that we've done and studies and analysis of our own customer base, it shows that it's slightly older. So anything from sort of 35 to 65 is kind of the more target that we see, or the more user that we see for Fairphone. I think the reason for that is also part of Fairphone's progression. We very much started as an organization that wanted to change the electronics industry and the smartphone industry for better. And so if you look at the name, it's Fairphone. And I think we concentrated our efforts very heavily on the fair part of the manufacturing side of making a phone, and perhaps less on the phone side. And so I think with every model of device, there were teething issues and there were learnings. And I think if you look at Gen Z, they probably want a smartphone that is as fast as possible and as innovative as possible. When I say innovative, I mean more from a tech specs perspective. I think, however, more and more people across the demographic spectrum are becoming more aware of what fair electronics, responsible electronics, ethical electronics is. And I think we'll start to see more younger users uptake a Fairphone, or more younger users go for a refurbished device, and not because it's cheaper, but actually because it's making an environmental impact.
Absolutely. And Lee, how about what's your perspective?
I think we've always appealed to a slightly older demographic. So certainly more like Gen X and Boomers, really. So probably the sort of 45 to 65 group predominantly. I think part of that is due to pricing, and also it's possibly brand related as well. So, you know, Generation Z life discovering new disruptive brands, whereas the co-op has been around for a very long time. It is disruptive. It is a force for social good, but it's probably, as a movement, stuck in its ways a little bit, and perhaps not always communicated hugely effectively outside of its kind of existing member base. But having said that, recently, you know, we've pivoted a lot towards online sales. We've worked very hard on our branding, and our sort of average age of new signups has been falling quite steadily over the last 7 or 8 years. So we're still a long way off, you know, being a destination for Gen Z, but I think we're certainly widening our base in terms of the demographic.
Okay, and I'm sure the partnership will with Fairphone will have a fairly positive impact. Luke, what are the main habits, would you say, that consumers need to change to have a sort of healthier, more sustainable approach to their sort of personal mobile ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's, as you introduced, people are encouraged to switch their handset more regularly than they should be. So one of the biggest issues within the electronics and smartphone industry is that there is a lot of energy being used to produce electronic goods, right? So most of the carbon emissions happen at production. Most of the wastage and destruction of precious minerals is happening because you're producing new items. So we need to produce less, we need to be using less precious minerals, and we need to be using less energy to produce these minerals, and that's going to have a positive environmental impact. How does that go back down to the end consumer? Is that we need to be using our devices for as long as possible. You know, I think if someone has a bike and the chain breaks or it has a puncture, you wouldn't buy another, you know, you won't go and buy another bike, you'll fix your bike. And I think there's this mentality that because vendors have rather cleverly closed devices, we don't have this mentality or this philosophy that we want to repair our devices. And I think there's more and more solutions, very much like Fairphone, that allows you to repair your device. And repair is important because repair allows you to keep something for longer. It breaks up that chain of linear economy of being like, right, it's broken, I'm going to buy a new one. Instead, it's broken, I'm going to fix it, I'm going to keep it for longer. And that behavior, you know, starts with a consumer, but obviously is impacted by the operators that shouldn't be pushing, you know, yearly upgrades. It starts also with, you know, vendors offering that ability to end users to keep it for longer. So yeah, I think from a consumer perspective, it's we need to repair and we need to keep for longer, quite simply.
And you know, Lee, who do you feel should bear the responsibility for change? Should it be the telecom providers, the manufacturers, or the consumers?
Well, I mean, I don't think that consumers should be made to feel guilty about their purchases. You know, they've only got the choice of what manufacturers have put out there. So I think the hierarchy should be, you know, the manufacturers first. They set the trends, they set the discussion, then the providers. So we have, you know, we have the value that we can add in terms of climate positivity, what we do with our profits from subscribers and so on, and then the consumers. But I think ultimately the answer is going to have to be regulation, because we've already seen conscious consumers make, you know, as much effort as they can. We know they're willing to make sacrifices or to pay more for ethical products. But I think really that governments should be forcing brands to do more. Otherwise, they'll just they'll just keep gaslighting their customers that transformational change isn't possible.
Okay, that's a pretty clear answer, so thank you. When it comes to content creators on Instagram and other platforms, they're obviously becoming increasingly vocal about greenwashing in fashion and food. What's your take on why we're not seeing it to the same extent in tech? And if we could start with Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I often, when I'm pitching Fairphone, I talk about the 80s and 90s, where fair trade coffee, tea, chocolate was almost quite a new thing. Now it's pretty rare that you wouldn't buy fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. I think it's the same thing with electronics now. It's very much a new concept. You know, everyone's got a smartphone, but no one is aware of the number of very, very rare and precious minerals that are needed to go into that smartphone. And not only from an environmental perspective, there's also a social perspective. You know, that there are things behind smartphone and electronics creation, such as child labor, corruption, unfair working conditions, and all of these things need to be tackled. So yeah, I think that it's difficult to, I don't know, like it's difficult to talk about greenwashing with electronics, because I think fair electronics is still a completely new aspect. I think what I see in the industry is a lot of organizations within the electronics value chain talking about net zero. So talking about how their company as a whole is going to make changes, which is important. But I also, and that's what I admire about Fairphone, it's what I'm passionate about Fairphone, is also product level. You know, what are your products doing from an environmental perspective and a social perspective? And what are you doing to improve that? And what are you doing to make it transparent? That so when someone is thinking about buying it, they, you know, you're not greenwashing them, and that your claims of what you're doing are genuine.
Cool. And Lee, anything to add to that?
Well, that was a great answer, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if mine's going to be a bit more simplistic, but I think there's possibly an element of cognitive dissonance as well. So content creators, may not be in a mindset to be hugely critical about some of the platforms they're actually relying on to make their living in the first place. But also, I think it's maybe because electronics are much bigger purchases than a pair of jeans or a bar of chocolate. It's not something we make with anywhere like the same amount of frequency. And as Lou says, although we've always got our phone on us, we're not constantly interrogating the ethics of buying it the same way we would do when we pick up a bar of chocolate or a pack of coffee.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to, I think, just discussing the importance of partnerships. How important is it for companies like Co-op Mobile and Fairphone to develop partnerships and to broaden out your ecosystem? If we could start with Luke.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Phone Co-op was one of our first partners. You also have a guest on here, which is another partner of Fairphone. As I mentioned, like predominantly in the UK market, although it is changing, but I still will use the word predominantly, people buy their smartphones via operators. And so it's companies like the Phone Co-op or Honest that gives us a platform to highlight that actually this kind of linear economy of changing your device whenever your contract runs out, whether it be 1 year or 2 years, really needs to change. And also, I think, that we've got similar goals. We're interested in sustainable electronics. We're interested in sustainable telecommunication industry. And I think no organization can do it alone. And I think that's, for me, it's always one of the interesting things or things that I find difficult when, in my opinion, when your organization is an ethical organization or a sustainable organization, or you're really trying to challenge an industry, you're often swimming upstream. And when you're swimming upstream, your vision is very much impaired because it's kind of almost like survival. Like, I've got to do what my organization needs to do to survive. And you haven't got this ability to look at what other organizations are doing and able to collaborate them. And I actually think it's super important to collaborate. And this sounds almost very political, but when when you have joint voices, or when numerous organizations are actually discussing the same thing and trying to achieve the same thing, you're going to have an impact not only on consumerism, but as Lee said previously, like, you need to have an impact on legislation. Unless you're changing the legislation of what you want to operate on, you're not going to have an impact. And so, yeah, I think collaboration with like-minded organizations within the electronics industry is really important.
Great answer. And Lee, anything to
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah, and for us as well, I think because we're a co-op, those those partnerships are very, very important. And the co-op itself is, well, there is a cooperative political party, so cooperation is deeply embedded within the UK structure. But we do spend a lot of time building partnerships with other cooperatives or social enterprises to enable them, their colleagues, employees, members, customers, to live more sustainable lifestyles. And because cooperation is a global movement and an ideal business model for utilities, it really behooves us to get out there and make as many connections as we can. So, for instance, we've recently started talking to several other European cooperative mobile providers like SomConnexio, Nebo, Telecoop, to try and find areas where we might be able to collaborate further, influence legislation, put pressure on networks, and so on. So I think, I don't think any of us working alone would get very far.
Okay. With partnerships and collaborations in mind, I mean, both your companies are part of Fairtech. So Luke, could you tell us a bit more about Fairtech and what the sort of driving force is behind the association?
Yeah, I think again it sort of goes back to my previous conversation. Like, I think the organizations that really, in my opinion, are driving change or have change at the core and not in their marketing are smaller organizations. And there are, or were, well, still are, sorry, some organizations that we kind of all had these ambitions, but realized that together we could actually create an offering. So Fairtech is about hardware, operating system, network that your SIM card is using, and then the economic model. So it's leased via a partner in France called Common. And so, yeah, Fairtech was about being like, look, not just like, hey, we're organizations that have the same vision. We're organizations that actually, if you combine us, we can give an end user an offering that, in our consideration, is more responsible and more ethical and more sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this is a good one for you, Lee, and I'm interested in the answer. So what are the key points to get across to consumers when they're faced with basically making an ethical choice versus a cheaper, more convenient option?
Well, ethical, I mean, firstly, it doesn't always have to equal more expensive. We can be competitive, but where there is an ethical tax, it's because that money is doing something useful. It's improving people's lives. But I think the key point here that I would love to get across is that convenience, it's not always cheaper. It does have a cost, but it's not one that's immediately apparent to the consumer. It's usually paid by someone else, somewhere else, very far away. And that just stores up problems for later. But sometimes the cheaper choice is the only one anyone has. So I'm certainly not here to shame anyone, but I think if you are privileged enough to be in a position to have that choice, then just try and see beyond your own needs, and think about what people have had to do to get that product in front of you, and what your decision on either side is enabling.
Okay. So in my introduction, I think I referenced that there's growing awareness, and certainly in the media there's a lot more coverage in terms of environmental impact. Fairphone 4 has obviously had a very good reception in the past few days, and we've got COP 26 coming up as well. So these are all sort of quite positive things. But from your perspectives, are you seeing any other kind of encouraging trends in the UK specifically?
No. but I say no.
Clear enough.
In comparison to France and in comparison to Europe. So at the like just from a like legislation point of view, there is the UK Environmental Audit Committee, who released a white paper and was basically looking at many of the things that we're talking about today. And in my opinion, the white paper, one, didn't go far enough, and two, the law or legislation that came from it wasn't enough. So I think a lot of certain government bodies were talking about now the UK has a right to repair movement. It doesn't. If you look at France, for example, France now has a repairability index. So every electronic product now has to have a rating out of 10 as to how repairable it is. We're nowhere near having that in the UK. And maybe I'm just being, well, maybe it's just pure arrogance that I'm not involved in any of the conversations, but from a French perspective and from a European perspective, I think Fairphone is very, very present in discussions and is used as an example. I don't see the same amount of effort when it comes to the UK. I think I'm very reliant on what's called the Restart Project, which is a UK institution that really is pushing for, responsible electronics and repairable electronics. So I often look to them, but what they're doing, but I often see that they're not very happy. So I don't think enough is happening in the UK. I'm also disappointed. And what frustrates me a lot, and I talk about this quite a lot when invited to conversations like this, is that I think recycling is the kind of new green sustainable term. And I think it's quite dangerous because I think a lot of operators and I think a lot of vendors are using the word recycling as a kind of mitigating factor to sell more. So if you look at recent launches that have happened, you'll see huge banners for trade-in programs, but that's, in my opinion, that's not sustainable. And I think it's more relevant, and that's happening more in the UK market than it is in the European market, that UK operators, UK vendors are saying that, look, buy this new device, but hey, it's responsible, it's sustainable because you're going to recycle the old one. Sorry, I'm now sort of turning into a bit of a rant, but I think the UK is behind with regards to many of the themes such as responsible electronics and sustainable electronics in comparison to the EU market and the French market. I see the UK lagging behind.
Okay, no, that's very clear, and I'm sure Brexit's going to make all the difference on that front. And Lee, what's your perspective?
I broadly agree. I think there are some green shoots from the point of view of an operator. We know that people are keeping their phones for longer. SIM only as a proportion of new signups is increasing. It's been growing for quite a long time, and refurbished handsets are growing as a sustainable option. They've become a lot more popular and also simply, I think, much better restored to a much higher standard than a few years ago. So from a consumer's perspective, they offer good value for money and reduce e-waste. But I think in terms of legislation and repair movements and everything Luke mentioned, we are quite a long way behind.
Okay. So, as maybe some of the people who are tuned in aren't fully aware, Fairphone follows sort of a modular model. So how are you sort of seeing the sort of understanding, in the UK again compared to Europe, which you may have partly answered, but I think it's interesting with the modular aspect, whether that is coming back a bit more, or how is it being perceived?
Yeah, I think again, if I do a demonstration of the Fairphone, so I've got here my Fairphone 3, actually still using it. So this is it, and then you can actually, within seconds, you can see me on the camera here. I can remove the battery. So one of the number one reasons as to why people buy a new device is because the battery performance starts to deteriorate. So Fairphone's philosophy is that, you know, once that battery starts to deteriorate, buy another battery and replace it very easily. When I do that demonstration to people, their knee-jerk reaction is like, oh yeah, it's like a sort of old Nokia, you know, old school. But it's not old school, and it should be the new school. It's just we're programmed to think that we can't open it up and we can't repair it easily. And I think that whole mentality needs to change. And so when you talk about modularity, I think modularity needs to, we need to stop thinking that it's an old school kind of philosophy and way of thinking. And we need to think that repair actually is cool and repair is actually modern and the way forward. And I think, again, another philosophy and a part that needs to change, and that's, you know, part of Fairphone's philosophy, is that we want to make repairs easy. You know, some people are also, because smartphones and electronics are very complex products, you know, it's not like a bike. You know, a bike, just pump it up and then you fix the tire. Whereas this, you know, you're gonna have to use a screwdriver. And I think that's part of Fairphone's mission. We need to continue to show that repairs and modularity is very easy and that people shouldn't be afraid of it. And yeah, that's how I would answer that question.
Okay. And Lee, from your sort of perspective, your customers, I mean, is it something which, you know, resonates with them, or is it?
Yes, we've only got a pretty small share of the market, but we have worked with Fairphone since crowdfunding for Fairphone 1 was launched in 2013. So our customers have certainly taken the device to heart. They get excited for every release, and take-up has been very good. And look, what Fairphone have done has been it's been phenomenal, really. I mean, plenty of other manufacturers have talked up and promoted modular devices, but haven't really managed to get any of them out of the design stage. And Fairphone have done it 4 times now, and that's absolutely remarkable. I was going to talk a bit here about the right to repair legislation, but I think Luke's rant.
I was saying that one up, I think. Yeah.
Quite appropriately. But I don't think it's as bleak as it may have sounded. I mean, I think the UK is Fairphone's third. Are we still the third largest market after Germany?
Yeah, after Germany and France. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of shared with Switzerland and Netherlands. Yeah.
Yeah. So from what we see from consumers, that we certainly know there's an appetite for modularity and for repair, and really I think what that modularity gives you is a full sense of ownership over the hardware. It is yours to do what you want with, and that really resonates with people.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving on to basically what we can expect to see from Co-op and Fairphone in the future. I won't say product rollout or infer that there's a whole host of new models coming out, but yeah, essentially, what are your plans for Q4 and for 2022? And start with Lee.
Yeah, I won't give away any secrets, don't worry. So for a long time we have been crying out for 5G and Wi-Fi calling. Our MVNO runs through a French company called Transitel, who have a wholesale agreement with EE, or now BT Wholesale, and they will be giving us access to 5G and Wi-Fi very early next year, so in the first quarter of 2022. So I'm very happy about that, because the reception in my flat is awful. So Wi-Fi calling will be a big boom for me, and for the rest of our customers, really. We will continue to develop our refurbished offer. Currently, that's just being trialled with colleagues within the wider society, but that's still quite a large and significant base for a trial. So hopefully we'll be rolling out refurbished handsets to a wider customer base early next year. And we'll continue working with our partners at Doro and Emporia to promote the benefits of handsets for senior citizens. Their handsets are excellent for consumers who want to live an active digital life, but may be slightly impeded by a slight lack of mobility or hearing or visual issues. And then one of the things we are really quite keen to do is to try and position mobile as a real alternative to fixed line. So one of the things that's happening in the UK telecoms industry over the next few years is a move to all IP services. So Openreach are making huge changes to roll out fibre across the UK. But one of the consequences of this is that they're going to turn off voice services. So nobody's landline will actually be able to make voice calls as standard. You'll have to take a separate voice over IP service. For a lot of people, that's going to be very difficult. It will mean, for a large number of potentially older or vulnerable customers taking broadband for the first time, it will mean installations and engineer visits. It could be potentially hugely disruptive and possibly economically not very appropriate for them. So I think there's a gap there that mobile services could also help fill. And then we'll also be expanding our climate positive program as well to mobile services. So we're currently working with Ecology to offset 50 kilos of CO2 for every broadband customer, which is way more than is actually consumed. It's about 20 times more. So it really is a climate positive broadband product, and we'll be rolling that out to mobiles as well in the next quarter.
Great. Okay, thank you. And Luke, feel free to share any sort of secrets that.
No, I think we only announced the Fairphone 4 last week, so that's very much the efforts that we'll be putting on. But the device is a vehicle for change. So we want to continue raising the bar within the industry when it comes to responsibly sourcing, improving the lives of those that are working within the electronics value chain, and really sort of echoing this need to have devices that we keep for as long as possible from a hardware perspective, but also on a software perspective. But no, very exciting. I think, it was only last week that we launched, so very, very exciting times ahead for Fairphone.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the sort of headline grabbers was the 5-year guarantee or 5-year warranty. So again, showing the commitment to making devices last rather than the sort of disposable message that you tend to get.
No, agreed. Thank you.
Okay, so I think sort of just a final question. This is a bit more of an opinion piece, I think. High streets, as we know, have been struggling to a certain extent with COVID and footfall, and just I think in some places a lack of imagination. How would you look to reinvigorate retail, and what could Co-op certainly do if they were to have a sort of bricks and mortar presence on the mobile side?
Yeah, so we're already a part of Mid Counties Cooperative, who have a very large retail footprint. So although we don't have our own Co-op mobile bricks and mortar stores, we have been trialing promoting mobile broadband and energy in our food stores. Just through a point of presence in the store or a pop-up stand. And having that access to an existing estate means we can test and learn, make changes to our pitch quickly and efficiently, and the responses that we've had from shoppers have been great. So I think just being able to respond to customers' needs quickly is a real boon. But I think when it comes to COVID, I think what we've seen throughout lockdown is people want to do as much online as possible now, which means traditional retail probably is going to face quite a difficult time, and a lot of bricks and mortar venues will probably need to be repurposed as social spaces with really good connectivity. Otherwise, they'll just face long-term vacancy, which would really hollow out communities. But I think co-ops, they've always been very strongly community focused, and respond to customer needs and provide solutions that work for communities. So I think a great way to kind of reinvigorate the high street is giving consumers a stake in the high street. That could be through shared ownership or volunteering. But for me, I think if we do end up with far fewer chain stores, but much improved pedestrian access, then I'll be quite happy.
Fantastic. Okay. And Luke, anything to add on that? Any searing insight or ideas?
No. I mean, I've spent the last 4.5 years in Amsterdam, so yeah, difficult one for me to comment. So I trust Lee's judgment.
Fair enough. Well, we've, I think, come to the end of the questions and finished pretty much bang on time. So thank you both very much for joining me for the Flock session. I think in terms of questions, what we can do if anybody wants to make contact, whether it's about a partnership, collaboration, or to find out more about your products and services, to send me an email and I'll happily put you in touch with our speakers. But yeah, thank you both again.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Certainly turn my camera off, but listen to the next part.
Same here.
Excellent. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.